J.P. Morgan Chase. Okay? So, there are opposites at the New York Stock Exchange. And so the history lesson here is that J.P. Morgan Chase is actually today working in the social impact bond space around early college and community college funding. And my background is in education, it's not the health space, right? And so I was tracking what was going on with putting children on blockchain, and that was piloted by Southern New Hampshire University, which has a huge online education component, and they're working with Google. But they piloted a blockchain transcript with MIT's spin-out called Learning Machine. So Learning Machine is also setting up blockchain transcripts in Tulsa, and then there's something called, I believe it's green light credential blockchain in Texas. And it's part of something called the Dallas County Promise. And so they're setting it up, again, because clearly paying for four-year education is horrendously expensive and puts a lot of people in debt. So what they're saying is, great, we'll have all of the kids in high school, like when they're a junior, start taking community college classes, and then you'll graduate with an associate's, which on the one hand sounds great from a financial standpoint, but on the other hand, why are we rushing 18-year-olds into a gig economy job market and like stealing them of actual time to learn and develop developmentally? Because how many people really think a 16 and 17-year-old kid is doing college level work, like that level work? I'm not trying to be elitist about it, but they're framing their solution in a way that actually miseducates more kids and puts them into a workforce where they are more vulnerable, because this workforce they're planning is the fourth industrial revolution, where they're like, well, nobody's getting a job unless your metadata says you're in alignment with the government interest, and we decide that the AI, you qualify for this gig temporary work. And that's the future they're feeding these kids into, and they're not being legit. They're pretending to parents like it's still the same old economy, and it's not. They're building an ever more brutal globalized economy. So these blockchain programs are also likely going to connect income sharing agreements, where you garnish your future wages by signing contracts, and then they're going to securitize that debt that's being done out of Purdue, and then they're going to create giant derivatives markets in that debt and trade them on global platforms tied to entities. Okay, so Dallas County Promise sounds really good. If you're like, oh, we want low-income kids to get an associate's degree, okay, but the hitch is that you get your transcript on blockchain, which means now you have a blockchain identity, so that you're queued up to compete in the badge-based micro-credential global gig economy space. And that's the truth of it. So the thing is, the backstory on J.P. Morgan is that his money was in railroads. So we have to understand that the broadband, the telecom infrastructure, the cloud world railroads were the tool of empire. They were the tool of manifest destiny, of conquering indigenous land and bringing in labor to take over, like, the territories, right, and to expand across the continent. That's what the railroads did, and they were often companies that fronted that for the government, and then the military came in and backed the corporate governments of the railroads to get that land, often which was like promised to, veterans and things to take indigenous land. So it was this corporate, private, public-private partnership, right, where the government paid our military to defend these corporate interests. So if you understand that the cloud and the blockchain and the broadband are the equivalent of the railroads, it makes a lot of sense what is happening now, right? And what is happening in the spatial web of blockchain is like we're being trapped up in this new imperial project that's being built around us in ways that are kind of invisible and people don't understand. So U.S. Steel, which was also J.P. Morgan, had the commodities to build the railroad tracks. Well, to get steel, you needed coal to have the heat. So they had coal too, and they were very involved in suppressing the labor movement, like radical labor movements, because these programs were terribly oppressive. At one point, U.S. Steel bought the Tennessee Steel, Coal, and Railroad Company, which was in Tennessee and northern Alabama. And there were mines called the Pratt Mines, where essentially they would scoop up black people off the street and say, you're a vagrant, we'll send you to court, oh, you can't pay the money, we'll throw you in the mine. And they worked those people to death. They worked them to death. And it's the same money that built this building. And it's the same money that's going to put these kids on blockchain and do it all over again. And so there's this separation of history that goes with it that is really important. So one of the things I want to do today is to put an energetic imprint on these, the built environment that represents these domination systems of power. And then the other piece, what's behind me, is Federal Hall. And so, there are parts of the history that you don't get told. And one book that really influenced me is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book Loaded about the Second Amendment. But part of that was a section about the Revolutionary War that I was never familiar with, which was that the British government had set a line of the Appalachians to say, you don't go over there. That's Indian land. You just stay on this side, okay? There were many of the founding fathers were land speculators, including Jefferson, Washington, who were surveyors. And they went over across the line and they started figuring out what they wanted, okay? So a lot of the revolutionary liberation was actually about, like, I'm not saying Great Britain was great. They were like, we're busy fighting India and building an empire here. Can you just behave and stay on your side of the mountain? Here, I'm going to get some stuff. So that's what Washington was about, right? And I said in Philly, when he was inaugurated, his first house, the house of the president, was in Philadelphia. He was writing to say, how can I keep my slaves? We were a city of free blacks. He's like, how do I keep my slaves? If I come here to Philadelphia, they like, what are the rules? Can I send them back to Mount Vernon? Whatever. And so when we talk about, like, we have this set of history, we have this understanding of it, but it's not full understanding, right? So these are the people, and many of them were also Freemasons. So that's all that's added to the thing too, right? So he's a surveyor, he's a land speculator. Next to this building is the Trump. This is the Trump building. And when I was looking on Google Maps, when I zoomed in, it said the Native Venture Capital Fund is in that building. So the Native Venture Capital Fund, often there are shell companies to military contracts and other government contracts that are covered, right? Like, I mean, there are some indigenous people, but they're not really fully indigenous that get these contracting systems. They're also working in opportunity zones. So these opportunity zones, the promise zones, are ways of laundering global finance into totally dispossessing and gentrifying low-income communities all over the country, communities of color, communities that have ties to indigenous people, and it's being framed as liberation, but these opportunity zones are going to be smart city gulags, right? They're going to be the new reservations, right? And so you've got Trump, you've got that land speculator real estate there, you've got the founding father real estate, and then we're all in empire where it is the powerful preying on people who are vulnerable, who don't even know the game they're in, right? They're just living day to day, and they're trying to figure out what they're doing, and they don't have the headspace, the bandwidth to absorb all of this. And then even if they did, what do they do about it? What are we supposed to do about it? So in my little framing, like I've sent my dandelions, and I have people have been sending me these amazing dandelions. I can't remember where this one comes from. This is a beautiful specimen. It looks like a medieval botanical. Trust me, it's in here. Press. And someone sent me one from the Rheinfall in Switzerland. And there's one in here, there's a Swiss postcard, okay? So I think that given the Swiss central banking system, that it's very appropriate that we're going to leave these two gifties here for the House of Morgan. And I want to scrub the step with someone from the UK sent me this lovely soap. And I actually knit this little wash rag. So I'm going to use some of the water that we gathered from the Hudson and upstate to put an energetic imprint on this building and somewhere over there on that building to sort of contest this history. And I also have some dandelions. My friend Grace, who's a quantum nurse RN in New Jersey, she said that they're kind of a little damp, so they were evidently preyed on by a shaman. So they're sacred, slightly moldy dandelions, but we'll leave some of those for them as well. And then I will also say, so this is what I'm going to leave with Washington, and you guys know more about sacred geometry, probably understand this better. This is a woman from upstate New York who sent me this box, and it has these lovely geometric pattern on it, and on the inside it has lovely dandelions and wood. She spends a lot of time on Lake Onondaga, okay, which is sacred land. And she sent me freshwater shells and feathers from the lake here. And so, yeah, we want to pass it around. And so I want to leave this at Washington, that is both this dominating power. So lately, I have been in touch with Stephen Newcomb, who I mentioned in my talk today. He wrote this book called Pagans in the Promised Land, and he has spent his life, I believe, Lenape and Shawnee ancestry, of studying the legal underpinnings of domination that goes back to the feudal bulls, studying them in Latin, going to Europe, looking at the original documents, because a lot of this is right out in the open if somebody stopped to read it. Right? They count on nobody's going to go to the library or look at the LinkedIn profile or listen to the 24-hour world-based webinar on blockchain and find out, or what are they going to do about it, right? We're going to do our dandelion. So I just want to read this. I have not read the whole book yet, but I said, Stephen, can I read from your book on Saturday? And he said yes, and I said, is there a particular part? And he also mentioned the Northwest Ordinance. That's something I want to mention. That was where the land was that they wanted. It was 3 to 5 states in the Ohio territory. And those wars against the Native Americans, the Miami, Ohio, were terrible and brutal. And a lot of it was asymmetrical warfare, burned crown food crops to starve out women and children. Okay? So this is how this narrative was carried out in terms of the erasure of and the takeover of those lands. And so the legislation for the Northwest Ordinance was signed here in this building. So Washington was inaugurated at Federal Hall, and then the Northwest Ordinance was also signed here. So this is a significant building. Beyond, we have the stock exchange on one side, and I will say, in the human capital bond markets, the trading we are commodities, so the trading is actually more based in Chicago. Chicago is the commodities market. So not to say the stock exchange doesn't have any bearing on it, but really the commodities is New York. So I'm going to read this last section from Stevens. And I only connected with him recently, but he says that better than I do. But we are on exactly the same page that this is a battle of life, and not just human life, but of all of life on planet Earth and nature and our obligations. So there is the old cliche about things getting darkest just before the dawn. The way out of the dark period in which we now find ourselves must involve a positive cognitive paradigm shift, away from the mentality and behaviors of empire and domination, reflective of the conqueror model, and the chosen people promised land model of the Old Testament, including the doctrine of Christian discovery and dominion in Johnson versus McIntosh ruling. Although it is beyond the scope of this work to do more than mention it, the wisdom to be found in the traditional knowledge of our original nations and peoples provides one possible path and a means of achieving the much-needed transformative paradigm. But it is not merely for the sake of humans that we must shift away from the subdue and dominion mentality and behaviors traced to the Old Testament and ancient Christendom. We must also do for the sake of all living things, including Mother Earth and our future generations. As the original nations and peoples of Great Turtle Island, we must invite the world to walk with us on this beautiful path of life, in keeping with the central teaching of Indigenous law: respect the earth as our mother, and have a sacred regard for all living things. And to me, that is quite a beautiful sentiment, to have the grace to say, walk with us on this path. And within this framework of respecting both the earth and all living beings. And that is something that I think, the concept of domination, that we have all been traumatized through our conditioning and our social circumstances at different levels, and not to say dominated in equal ways and equal measures, but we're all working our way out of this. So yeah, I guess we will. We have the bucket, and if anybody wants to take, we can also do some rose petals and dandelions. I'll circulate things around. These are slightly moldy, I will just say. If you have mold allergies, maybe don't take those. I've never really done this washing thing before, but I'm gonna start. I will say this came out of the river. Anyone else who would like to put an intention is more than welcome, but I can't say much to the sanity of this particular sanitation of this particular water. It also has beautiful dandelions that Kat collected. So most of my dandelions are dry, but she had the wherewithal to think about putting some in the refrigerator. So we have. I actually have to say they came from Carla. Oh, Carla! Well, thank you, Carla. I appreciate it from my sister-in-law. Well, see, so they're upstate. They're Haudenosaunee dandelions. See, so it's so great. Well, it's the gift economy that keeps on giving. So I'm gonna just come up here and leave this and put a little water on this threshold. Anybody else wants to, with more than welcome. And I think the revocation.
It's time for us to go soon.
As we think about going over the Fifth Reserve, the revocation is going to be for me, and it does have to be for you, but that we revoke the doctrine of domination. We do not consent to the human capital bond market. We do not consent to revoke our consent to 5 and 16 and 2 problematic about this, but so yes, we
Leaving this stuff here? Or is
don't
that
know.
over
we
there?
condemn commodification
sure.
of human life. We revoke consent of the doctrine of domination. We revoke consent for human capital bond programs. We condemn blockchaining children, vulnerable populations, smart city policing, and we reject transhumanism and the 5G telecoms. And we want a world of love and abundance, and we want healing and justice, and we want for all people's needs to be met and people to be heard, and for us to find our way and be good relative to all the other things in the earth. So that is my pitch. If anybody else, I don't know if anybody else is a bit dirty, but we're more than welcome to. And then if not, we'll go over to Federal Hall. And if you would like to leave some dandelions on either side, or little petals, you can do that as well. Oh, Julianne, do you want to put a little stage up here? Yeah, on the side maybe? And then we can, I was just doing the water on the...
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah.